Well, here I sit on a rainy winter day to record this talk for you just in front of the conference. And this talk actually will be the last one if plans work out to stream on the D track. And so I hope I have the luxury to be with you in the chat and say hello and answer your questions during the talk. Maybe I'm even having time to hang out with you a little bit in the lounge. But we'll see. So if I'm not around, it didn't say hello yet, then I'm probably not there. Maybe I join later. We'll see. And to my future me, I hope the conference went well, but we'll see. For now, I will be, giving this talk I've already given in summer to my user group, though it's on YouTube if you want to see it later. Easily to find there. And probably the conference version will also be on YouTube later. So hello, YouTube. And let's get started with this talk about how to import CSV files. And let me quickly go into the slides. So, hello. I'd like to talk about, how I imported CSV files into a Qt program with a standard C++, and let's go. So this is mostly about code I've written in June, July, and this is also when this talk was created during like a week when I did code review and was, having my reflections hold up in this of my code base and was, putting this into this presentation. So let's go. So motivations were that I've been dealing with CSV files this year quite a lot, mostly theoretical, and now I had a practical reason to write code for it. I was like really excited to do it, and also was wondering what would I find into the intersection between standard C++, which I prefer for such tasks, and then ultimately having to convert the data at some point into Qt types like QString. Just before we start, let me say one thing on CSV files. Don't use CSV files, right? No one uses CSV files because they think that it's a great format. It's full of pitfalls and stuff, and often when you have to deal with CSV files, someone else has made that decision for you that this is the input format. It's kind of the case here, but just want to make clear this is not me saying that CSV files are great or that you should use them. I do think that you should avoid them, but on the other hand, it's worth talking about handling them because they're quite common, unfortunately, in everyday user land. So let's see how we will, continue in this talk. We'll talk a bit about the why, where, then of course go into the CSV file import itself, and then talk on a little bit about the lessons learned. Why? I'm organizing this conference, and for 10 years I had Xing events as a ticket shop. It was glorious to have it. I miss this event service a bit. So the big news last year was that Xing events closes, and for this year I wouldn't need a new ticket service. And with that, I would have a different ticket shop this year. And in summer, I needed to import the data from the ticket shop into my local program to start the voting on the talks. And it was already clear that I'd be only using the ticket service I've been using this year, only this year, okay? I've made the decision to stick with them for this year, not to have two different ticket services in 1 year, but I also made the decision to make a different ticket service next year, as to choose a different ticket service next year, okay? Don't don't want to go too much into the details of that because that's not topic of this talk. This talk is about the CSV import, and the ticket service actually has an API, but I found out that it's basically not supported, and that it's actually really hard to find support at all, even with other things. And so I was like, nah, a CSV report which I can generate and which has all the attendees probably is best to be used in this case. And so that's what I went with. Let's quickly talk about where the data from the CSV file goes, right? This program actually is called EventBackend. That's its name. And that's what it does. It's a database front end, and on the next slide, it's all in text there. It's basically the program which contains the database and the code to manage a lot of things in the conference, from getting the list of badges, importing, exporting attendees, writing invoices, changing invoices, all kinds of stuff is in this program. It handles the voting, or the voting result, to be precise, and so on. It's not legacy, but in ports it is, because every year I have added some new function to do something, and then not every year this function lives for the next year, and sometimes like the Xing service is just, not existing anymore. So this code is now dead code, and I'll keep it around to know what I did with the Xing service when I use an API again. And I kind of want to use an API again because it's a lot easier to just trigger the call to the API from the browser program than to manually download the CSV and then to import it into the program. Even if it's like, it's not a big step, but it's annoying to have to do the extra step. This program is built with Qt, and I'm a heavy Qt user. I know a lot about Qt, and this talk made me find out a lot of things about Qt which I didn't know. So it's kind of a good takeaway for me that my Qt knowledge is now better. Mentioned that is a database front end. So it means like all the input goes into the database, and then we do something in the program. If you want to create an output, we get this from the database and handle it then in C++. And so this has the disadvantage that everything looks like an SQL query in a SQL-centric application. In some parts, it's an advantage because it's very reliable. And in other parts, it's just, it makes the code right. That's more like SQL-centric and not C++-centric. And again, for 10 years, I've been using Xing events, but it's not a heavy influence on the program because already back then I was like, I don't want to rely on the ticket service 100%, and I don't want to rewrite all my code if I need to change it, which mostly has kept up. But it's visible in some parts, and Xing always has been only one of the sources for the import. So I do have an internal ID, etc., so that I do not rely on so much on the things. I save them and I use them where I need to use them, but I don't have actually the problem that I kind of need to everyone just use this service. I can import other sources and have my internal ID used with them, and they just are marked in a different way. And as time was of the essence, my focus was in summer to add to the code base, and in a good way that is stable, and also kind of creating a working and reliable process for this year. So let's talk about the CSV file import. Quickly, before we start talking, CSV files only in tabular format, okay? Kind of want to define this as First line is headers and field names. Every line has every field, empty fields, maybe comma, comma, just nothing, empty quotes. I chose to index by number and not by field names because I viewed this as easier. And so in the code, I have a lot of constant int variables, or like size t because it's an index, that are then named after what it is. And we all know the ISO standard for CSV files. And that's, I think, one of the main problems when you handle CSV files is there's no standard. Okay. I am happy, and often you will have the situation that the CSV files you get are from the system source, program writing the export, and you import it. So it's kind of reliable, but there's not really like a standard, and there's some CSV libraries, but it's not like that they all do the same, or that JSON is way more standardized than CSV. And again, it's non-tabular CSVs. I've worked with that as a developer. It's not as much fun. But sometimes those are actually standardized, and you know what field is what, but that's not the case for us really. And then basically, right? You read your CSV file, and read by line if you can. Okay. So in C++20, we have the advantage that we can use split, and STD ranges split gives you a view on this. This is kind of nice and gives you what you would want. But there's just one problem. What about quotes? If your CSV files is only numbers or text without the delimiter in it, cool. Nice. But the vanilla case, the standard CSV file, which is out there, which so many people have to deal with, split cannot handle. Okay? No way. And of course, you can, do some post-processing to correct that, and that's probably something I will look at. But at the moment, split view is just splitting the view. It's doing what it's supposed to do, but you'd have to write some post-processing to correct that again. Then quotes also mean that new lines can be in the quote. And that is a whole different problem when you parse. It's not so nice. Again, the standard has an answer to that, and that is std quoted, which actually can read a quote until the end and returns that. But quoted itself returns a string and not a string view. And when we work with views, we would like to have a string view in our case. And I think it's also kind of, somehow, see, it's an IO manip, so it's related to IO streams. It's not really what we want. Would be cool. And maybe I read a paper about adding functionality and stuff to quoted that's not relying on IO strings. But that's also a different story. Thankfully, I am able to read per line. Okay, so if that's like one of the things you should check for. If that's what you can expect, and this has stayed true, by the way. So std getLine it is. GetLine has a big advantage that we can reuse the same string and set the same allocation again and again and again. And that basically it will only grow when one allocation is bigger than the things you've read before. And so it will have just very few allocations in that way. And that's good enough for my case. Then I do reading by character. And this works. It's easy code. I've purposefully written this code in a lambda to keep it local and maybe to port it to some normal function later. But that probably will never happen. I just will delete this code after this year and we're done. As I say, it's a refactoring opportunity, but it's working code, and correctness is more important than performance. And it's a detail. And I was thinking like, hey, boy or more horsespool. Because you search a comma in a string, and that's a string search, right? But boy or more horsespool is only good if your pattern has a certain size. And we're searching after a pattern which is just one character. And so boy or more horsespool doesn't work on that set well, or I haven't actually really measured that, but it's something I don't expect to work, so I don't waste time on it. And then, yeah, I do have two modes. One of the modes is a comma, and the other mode is to read a quote. And that's kind of how it works. And then it puts the string view in the vector and returns that as a line. So this parses a line from the string to a string view. And then we do the processing, because the next get line will overwrite this string and make this vector invalid, and maybe even like reallocate, and this vector would have string views which point into memory that's potentially now dangling. And the whole structure wouldn't make sense anymore. And once I had this running, the first thing I did is look in your headers. Look in the headers of the CSV files and know the index number for what you want. So this is the first code I got running with this. It's just what do I want? And here you see is some examples of what I want. I want the order number. I want the date, first name, last name. And then you have the opportunity to look at your data. And from looking at the data, I thought, well, those numeric IDs, they're quite big. So handling them as an integer would not be as advantageous as it could be, right, in a lookup or something. And I didn't really have any documentation from the provider, so I didn't know what those numbers actually represent and what the guarantees on uniqueness on them are. And also the data looked in multiple ways ordered. The IDs looked ordered because they were monotonically increasing over time and with quite big differences between. So this is like a global number which is increasing on that service, I guess. And the date also looked ordered. I've written some simple code to check this, because I was like, I assume it's ordered. And then I was surprised to find out, oh, the ID fields are not ordered. And I was like, I know, it's ordered by date, right? No, it wasn't. So that's like, if you don't really have a documentation that guarantees you the ordering, and you find a field in your data that looks ordered, check if it really is. And even if it is, because if I would have looked earlier at this file, it would have been ordered. This can be really, really troublesome and prone to making you write code that relies on this order, and then the file you import the next week isn't ordered. And suddenly you have a bug because of that. And maybe you don't even notice, because an attendee that isn't imported into my program along, I have like 102 attendees imported and not 103. Would I notice that? Maybe not the first time. So if you don't really have like guarantees on ordering, don't rely on it. And it can be very, very hard to find information on that. And ordering the data could invalidate the order, right? If I would say, oh, I order the data and then I, process this and rely on the ordering, this could very easily, depending on your code, on how you write your code, what you do, invalidate your data, and again lead to bugs. And yeah, so of course I've been wondering why it's not sorted, and it's an additional step, and running something in the cloud costs money. So why would you sort in your cloud where you pay for an export which is handled, right? Also, it takes longer. You need to sort the data, and you want to have a responsive website. And the other thing is why this happens has probably to do with ordering. There is two folks ordering tickets, and the first person comes and opens the order, and then they go talk to their boss, and their boss says, hey, hold that. I need to talk to, or we need to get some internal stuff cleared before we can continue this order. And so this order is internally in a session, and at least with my ticket service, it seems that they then have those things which end up in your order already allocated. This number exists, your order, etc. And then they come and complete the order the next day. And in between, people buy tickets, and then you have this that this is different in the database than the order is. And obviously also the date is the original date when they started the order, not when they closed it. So at least as far as I'm aware of, the data I have is not ordered. And I was very happy that I took the additional effort to see if that's the case or not. And there was no documentation. So if you don't have documentation on it, if you don't have really, really strong hints that ordering is something you should rely on, don't. But let's talk a bit more about C++ and allocations, because we're importing something and allocations probably will occur, and we don't want to have too many allocations. So converting from a string view to QString will allocate. An std string is 1 byte per character, and in my case, it's UTF-8. The QString is UTF-16, which is 2 bytes per character. And the QString instance itself will use reference counting, so that gets to be on top, right? Which is minimal in comparison to the allocation of the string. And those allocations are the biggest bottleneck. And I was thinking, how can we have less allocations? And still, I have no choice. I need to convert to QString. But in the import case, maybe we can reuse the QString. And in this function I have here, I don't do that. And I was thinking about, hey, could I do that? So this is a bottleneck. And here we see that I concatenate two Q strings, the order number and the attendee ID kind of, to get a new unique string, because I need to have something which is unique, which identifies an attendee in the import, right? And first time I did that, I got into the SQL trap, and I wondered why the import is so slow. Because constructing an SQL query every time, the locations, database connection, and all that, not fast. Don't do that. But then also, I have those allocations which are just going into my APIs and not doing anything, which are not even like having their own variable. Kind of hot allocations, if you want to name it that way. And I was wondering, like, can I have those conversions and those allocations be more efficient? Can I reuse the allocation in the Q string in this case to save on allocations? Which brings you to the whole design question: should this function conf to Q string or convert to Q string, right? Should it return the Q string? Of course, this is great for usability, but we have those local allocations, which if we are able to reuse the Q string, because it's reference counted, so maybe we can. It would save us a lot of allocations and make the whole code better in performance points of view. So to avoid this parameter usage very easily, we would make an out parameter which takes the Q string by reference. Another thought was like, maybe the Q string has from UTF-8, and maybe there's a version from UTF-8 to just put in a pointer and a size and have this then internally be used with the allocation of that instance. And in a perfect world, I could show you the code. Would be wonderful. This is such an easy opportunity. Unfortunately, from UTF-8 is static, and a static function cannot access a member function or a member type, a member variable, and so it cannot, plug this converted UTF-8 into an already existing Q string. It always creates a new string, a new Q string instance, and so even if it has this interface of a char string pointer and a size type, we cannot avoid allocating when using this. Then I've wondered about this on Twitter, and it brought up some interesting conversations, and some of the things you'll see now in the next slides is from that. And I want to point out that there's no static conversion function taking a Q string either, right? You could make a static conversion function still and have an out parameter taking it by reference. That doesn't exist. So if we convert from UTF-8, which we do, we always allocate with Qt. But Qt has string views, and someone pointed out, hey, why don't you use Qt's UTF-8 string view? Which, yes, that's nice. But actually, I already have a string view in the standard, and it's nice to know that also Qt has that, and that it's actually one for Qt UTF-8. That's nice. And this means like you could write generic code taken an auto parameter of what could be a QString view, a QString or UTF-8 QString view. So you would be more flexible in the code you write and would be able to make that more generic. There even is like an AnyString view. So you kind of can do that, but it's also, the way Qt is. One thing which lets you actually also decode into QString is the QString decoder class, which I want to mention in this context. This actually helps you a little bit. It preserves internal state, which I don't know how much that is. Gives you more control than from UTF-8, as this internal state is not like reallocated every time. And I'm not sure if that's actually an allocation with the from UTF-8. But also this class does not do any buffer reusage, as far as I know. Okay, and no one has pointed out that so far that it's able to do that. So the big thing which I want to save on the allocations is also here not an option. This is an example for the QString decoder. Basically, it's a function object, and then you can read chunk data and convert it. And that way you don't have to, create a conversion type with your hot loop every time. It's nice to know. It's great when you need something like that. In my case, I was more looking for, hey, can I also reuse this byte array and reuse the string? But that seems not to be supported. And then all those QString view classes are nice, but Qt itself and my code using Qt is full of QString. And those instances very, very rarely have now QString view alternatives. And maybe with Qt 7 we get this more prominent, that we have less allocations. But with reference counting, Qt is probably fine in that way, and says, well, QString view doesn't need to allocate when it's passed by value. But maybe we can get a QString which is able to use its internal allocation in conversions like this. So unfortunately, I could not get around those allocations, which in my case doesn't matter so much because it's not like running on a server costing me money in the cloud, just running locally, and I can go drink a coffee. So the big import is done, and also fine-tuning this. Every other import will cause much less allocations and run a lot faster, which was true. But there still was a trick, or is a trick, which we can do here to avoid allocations, and that was that I've created a flat set of attendees which I have, and I've I do import this from the database and fill it with the attendees I already have, and then I do not convert the attendee number to QString. I can keep that into an std string, which still not great, but that's how this got rid of some allocations at least. And now you have the allocations which convert to QString only if an attendee needs to be actually imported, which makes the program run a lot faster. I also needed to import other things like the order data. So I needed to create for every order an order object, and not for every attendee. Okay, so I need to kind of see, am I still in the same order? Need to add it to the order object, new order. Oh yeah, then push the last order object into a container and start a new one, and then later write this to the database. And the reason behind that is that the ticket service, which I've already kind of hinted at, I'm not happy with. They've got actually the invoices they wrote in the name of my company. Okay, this is an invoice which is officially it's not like it's written by them, but it goes on my company, so I'm reliable for it. And they got the what wrong, and people were pointing this out, and I called them and here the what is wrong. Don't you see that? And they explained to me, no, the invoice is correct, the what is not wrong. And if they were if you need to change that and correct it, then you need to correct it yourself. And so I, had to create code in the next step to write those invoices, which is a different process. And by the way, I couldn't tell that in summer because it didn't happen, but in mid-September, the ticket service suddenly wrote the invoices correct because seemingly too many people told them that there was something wrong with their invoices, and they finally figured out that it was right. But I had their own tax person tell me that those invoices were correct from their support. And they didn't tell anything about that this would be corrected or something, which I found strange. And yes, just a few folks noticed this as all, and it would have not been a big problem, but it was a problem for me because I'm responsible for the invoicing of my company, and I cannot have a third-party service write invoices which are not correct. So creating the invoices and sending them was the next thing to do, which I did. Really nice working service, and this has worked brilliantly, but also triggered a lot of people requesting changes to the invoices, like changes to the invoice address or adding a PO number. And that's something I didn't have to handle prior. Xing events created their own invoices, but not on my company's name. So if you wanted to change something in that invoice, you would contact the support of Xing, which they did have one, a good one, and they would do that. And I've usually probably never noticed those cases, and this year I kind of see that this is a normal thing to do as a conference organizer. So, but this is a different process, and when I wrote the talk, the code wasn't there, and also it's not too interesting. Lessons learned. Yeah, I learned a lot about conversions and how they allocate the strings and UTF-8 and how to get around this in the design space. But then having a library which has a type which hasn't yet discovered that this low-hanging fruit option exists, and with copy on write, you of course would need to create and allocate a new string if you would be holding 2 instances of that string, right? It's a bit more complicated to implement that. But most queue strings only have 1 instance. And in that case, the reference count would just needed to be checked, and if it's 1 and it's getting written to, then you could probably do that. Then there was this year's IDs are in the billions, and putting that into an integer type is not really something sensible, but this is of course useful if you use this then in a map. It's a lot faster to compare in a processor an int to comparing a bigger string. And yeah, long int is a thing. Could have done that, but I don't want to do calculations with it. Faster indexing, as I said, is the main benefit. Internally, I use my own ID, which is around 7K right now, and will stay probably for a long time under 1 million. I mean, I wish I had 1 million attendees at Media C++, but that's probably never going to happen, even with the online event now, theoretically making that possible. With strings, I just added them, the order ID and the attendee ID, and it was unique, and that's fine for this year. And next year I have to think more about do I like the next year's ticket service, and are we going to stay with that? And yeah, converting from UTF-8 to QString will always cause an allocation, and that there's no way to reuse the buffer and no way to have less allocations. It's kind of sad, but that's the way it is. And when we work with QString and Qt, we do it because QString is everywhere, and it's a common type in Qt, and Qt itself, even if it has no support for QString views, in its own API, still has a lot of things which could be updated to take a QString view. And I'm not so much into the Qt implementation that if that would make sense and where the problems for that and where they wanted to start with that, and if that's in the roadmap, but would be interesting. And on the other hand, I like string view, and if I need a string view, I prefer the one from the standard, if I can use it. So if I work in Qt and I need a Qt string view, that's fine. Great, good to have. But with most things, the whole view and ranges and views is in the standard, kind of the future. And that's basically the end. Thanks for listening. I will let you know in the chat if I'm you probably know that I'm here in the chat or not. Maybe I'm busy organizing the conference. And with that, I will end the talk. Thank you. And I hope to be able to meet you in the lounge. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A tab that I can answer them, because can't guess that from the future. But that's probably the best process to do. And otherwise, I'll let you know in the chat if I'm in the launch. Thank you, and see you in the Media C++ update, which is next.